All right, so we should kind of get through all the material for sure that you need to kind of complete that homework assignment by the end of the week. So the end of the day on Friday. We actually really already covered it last Friday, kind of the supply stuff, because the questions on supply at the end of that homework really weren't, we've already shown how to do the shift. So you would have had some idea how to kind of get on and start tackling those. After today, I think it'll be a little bit easier to tackle those last few problems that are related to supply, because we'll keep talking about supply today. I think probably introduce the idea of kind of equilibrium. We might not quite get there, but for sure we'll do that on Friday. Okay. Another thing, if I can ask you guys, so I'm not seeing everybody pop up when I sync my iClicker. So we got two things to do this. Did everybody kind of go on and re-register when I mentioned that last week, or no? So make sure you are on Canvas. Make sure you've got the right iClicker registered under the iClicker registration on the left-hand side. Or if you're using the app, and I'll put an announcement up on Canvas. This is my first time using the iClicker Cloud thing, so I thought that it would identify you based off your student IDs, and that's what it should be doing. But then I was told maybe this will help me able to sync everybody. If you go to join.iclicker.com, so you can do this on your phone, you can do this on a computer, and then put in our code to join this class to make sure that it's kind of putting you under my registration so I can sync you up then to Canvas. The code for our class is going to be here. And I, of course, I exited out of it. Oh, come on. I got to open Word again. Open. Here we go. I'll blow this up so we can actually see what I'm talking about. So this class is going to be H5 AP1. So there should be like a little plus sign if you're on the app, or if you go on a web browser when you're registered, or once you sign into your iClicker account, that little plus sign should allow you to add classes or join classes. And this would be the kind of code for this class. Okay. So if we can try, I'm recording everyone's stuff. It's just a matter of getting it synced up, so I don't have to send out individual emails, so that I have to manually sync you up to whatever the corresponding kind of code coming in is. That would help me out. So we'll try this, try to add this course using this code if you're using the app. Make sure it's registered on Canvas correctly, and then hopefully Friday I will be able to tell you that I'm able to sync everybody up and having no issues. Okay, but I'm still having a few issues with some of you, so I just want to make sure that I'm picking it up every single person and syncing them correctly.
Last Friday, you're going to submit all this people's response you got.
No, so what I'm going to do after doing this, anyone that I'm not able to pick up, I'll send you individual emails. That way I can kind of manually sync them up. So hopefully when I get back to my office after today's class, everyone's gotten on and joined or kind of re-registered. Hopefully when I resync the roster, everything looks okay. I don't have to send out any emails. If I'm still got a few I can't sync up, you might be getting an email from. Yep.
If they weren't synced up previously, you didn't count them against them.
I still haven't recorded, so I can see them in my grade book. I just don't know what device goes with what name. So that's why I'm trying to make sure I can get one last sync after today, and hopefully everyone's has been solved. Okay. Yeah, you're good. Yeah. And if you have any questions, come up to me after class, stop by during office hours. I think we should, I have most people, so most people should be okay. Just asking everybody to check one more time. Yeah. All right. So other than that, homework due at the end of the day, Friday. If you have any last minute questions, I'll be in my office from 2 to 4 today and tomorrow.
The only question I have is it going to sync on Friday?
Yeah. Yep. So once I sync the rosters and see that I can match a name up to every single response identification, whether or not that's
I mean for the homework.
Oh yeah. So I got an email about that. So it'll sync up to Canvas. Usually the Pearson does an auto sync drop once the due date's passed.
Okay.
So it should show up on Canvas, but it won't show up until after that due date's passed. Sometimes they do syncs periodically, so where if you do it early enough. Yeah, if you can see it in the Pearson app that you've got it complete and you've done it, you should be okay. And then after the due date's passed, it should sync your grade up to Canvas. Yep. I know I wish that it synced it up as soon as you submitted that as well, but for whatever reason it doesn't.
I've had other classes that
different platform. I have used one for a different course and it does it as soon as someone completes it. For whatever reason, this one they don't have it set that way. Yeah. All right. Any other questions before we get going here? Okay. So we said, I kind of already gave you the information you needed to complete the homework last Friday. We're talking about supply shifts, right? And so we said supply shifts get a little bit weird to think about, because if I draw them like I did here, kind of with these arrows, well, how does an increase in supply look like it's shifting down? And we said, well, the real way to think about it, I've got a slide here that makes this easier, so I'll come back. The real way to think about it is more of like an increase in supply is a shift to the right. That if we held prices exactly the same, now at that same price, I'm able to produce more, right? If the price is $1, I can go from 5 to 10 units. If the price is $2, I could now go from 10 to 15, so on and so forth. So no matter what the price, when I see a shift in supply, every single quantity supplied should be higher at every given price if I'm seeing a shift in supply. So I think we had just left off last week. I said, well, what's one obvious thing that's going to shift supply? Well, we said we can think of supply as what? What was another way I said? We can think of demand as marginal benefit, or we can think of supply as reflecting. So we've got marginal benefit, and I'll always do something as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to my marginal cost. So for these producers, their benefit is whatever price they can sell the good for. So they'd be willing to supply a certain number of units if the marginal cost of supplying that last unit is still below or equal to that price. So we say the last unit supplied, it must be that the price of the good has to be equal to the marginal cost. So I can think about it this way, right? Like, let's say I set a price of $5, and at that fifth, at $5, I would supply 5 units. What that's telling me is every single quantity below this, so 4, 3, 2, 1, the marginal cost of each one of those units is below $5, right? So the marginal cost of those first 4 units are all below that price of $5. Right? And my sign looks nice here. And then at that 5th unit, right, because I stopped supplying anything past 5 at that price of $5, it must be that for that 5th unit, the marginal cost was exactly equal to that price of $5. So we said another way of thinking about the supply curve is it's really telling you the marginal cost of each one of these units. So what's one thing that's going to increase those marginal costs? We said, what if input prices go up, right? The price of lumber goes up. Now to build a house, it's going to cost me a lot more money. So it doesn't matter what number of houses I want to build. This is obviously these values don't apply to the kind of example of a house. But if I want to keep building the same number of houses, if input prices go up, then at any given quantity, my marginal costs are now higher. So when input prices go up, our new supply curve decreases or shifts to the left. Okay. It's kind of where we left off, a little bit of summarization. We've got leftward shifts in supply being decreases, rightward shifts being increases. So if I've got technology boosts or improvements, so I can think about, let's say I'm producing, oh, it's a good one that's recent. Well, let's say I'm producing automobiles and the chips, like the electronic chips that are required. I see like this huge improvement in technology to produce them, so I can produce them at much lower cost. Right? Or if you want to think about the kind of electric car example, the batteries that were coming with the electric cars, I now all of a sudden I can see this huge technology improvement. I can now produce that car with a battery at a much lower cost, right? Basically, technology improvements. So if I see technology improvements, and I now can produce the same number, but at a lower cost, it's really just like I've seen a decrease in in my input prices, or if you want to kind of call this my input costs, right? Now, if I want to continue to produce the same quantity that was before, I can do so at a much lower cost. So if I'm thinking about how is that going to shift my supply curve, got my upward sloping supply curve, which reflects that as the price of a good goes up, the quantity supplied of that good goes up, right? Makes more money for the producer, so they're willing to produce more. But if I see a technology improvement, which then decreases my prices of producing this good, right? Makes it now relatively cheaper, which is something we really saw in electric cars. Like originally, the price was much higher, technology improves, and the price comes down quite a bit in producing those. Am I going to see a supply increase or decrease from these technology improvements? Well, if we think about supply represents the marginal cost of producing these, and the technology makes it relatively cheaper, and then every given quantity, my marginal cost value is now going to go down. So I'm going to see this rightward shift or an increase in my supply curve. Right? So basically, input prices and supply go in opposite directions. My input prices go up, supply goes down. Costs more to make something, I don't make as much of it. Right? If input prices go down, well, now it's relatively cheaper to produce this. I'm now willing to produce or supply more of it to the market. So I see an increase in supply. So technology improvements are really just like input price decreases. There are not many examples where we see it work. Let's see if I have anything else here I didn't say, but I'm pretty sure I got it off. I added humor in the Poem Dynamo, which is a great movie if you haven't seen it. Pretty dry humor. I think it came out when I was like a senior in high school. But anyways, we can think about technology improvements the exact same as input prices, right? It's just that we don't really ever see technology devolve, right? We usually only see technology improvements. So we think about technology usually just increases my supply curve. We very rarely see that like the dark ages or we lose technology, right? So it becomes more expensive. Any questions kind of as we're refreshing your memory about these shifts in supply? We're going to talk about a few more things that can shift our supply curve, just like we talked about quite a few things that can shift the demand curve. And I think it kind of alluded to this one last week as well, but we said if the number of buyers increases, that's going to increase our demand curve because market demand was just adding up every individual's demand curve. So if I have more individuals, it's going to add up to a larger value. So it's increasing demand. Here, if I have more suppliers, right? What do you think is probably going to happen to market supply? It's going to go up at the same price. There's now more companies willing to supply units to the market, right? So the number of sellers, as the number of sellers goes up, we see supply also increases. This one's not too interesting. It's pretty intuitive, pretty straightforward, I think. You can think about it, and going back to that example, if we've got Zoolander, all these other goofy names, whatever, they're producing these drinks. Well, now if another company joins the economy, well, we now see not just 2 or 3 people supplying 2 or 3 drinks at whatever the price was. We now have 4 people producing that number of drinks at that given price. And so when we add them all up, we end up with a higher supply. So pretty straightforward. That one's really crazy. Won't waste too much time on that. Yeah.
Does that in turn make the demand curve go down?
So think about it as anything that impacts the producers isn't going to impact the demand curve. Eventually, what we'll see, and get to this on Friday a little bit, is it ultimately impacts the price and the quantity we see transactions, or the price and quantity we see of actual transactions that take place. So you kind of imagine, like, let's say I've got 1 million producers. They're willing to produce a ton of units. But what are they producing? They're producing, I don't know, green markers, right? How many of you really want to buy a green marker today? There's no demand, right? So nothing is sold on the market, right? So what we're eventually going to get to is the transactions that take place is a combination of how high, how low is supply, and how high and how low is demand. right? So for now, we're just thinking about that supply curve, right? So this is only going to impact the supply curve. It won't impact demand at all, but it could impact the result in what we call equilibrium. So just like with consumers and demand, we had price expectations can kind of play a role in shifting our current supply curve. So we talked about how that would go with consumers. And I think that's easy to think about because we all are consumers. But let's think about what's going to happen to supply curves. You can think of supply representing marginal cost, right? So what if, it's the first one I have here, market expectations, right? So these are going to be something like, what if I expect there to be a colder than average predicted winter? So let's say some analysts come out today, they say this winter is going to be really brutal, really low temps, a lot of snow. Well, then what might happen to the current supply of natural gas, right? Well, if I know that there's going to be a greater need for it down the road, people might be willing to pay more for it down the road. Well, for me as a producer, a higher price is a good thing. It means I'll make more money selling it. So what I might do if I expect there to be this increase in demand down the road, or that the price of this good might be higher down the road, I'm going to decrease my supply today or stockpile it for the future, right? Not put it on the market today, put it on the market in the future, right? When I know the price is higher. Now, these market expectations are really going to be pretty specific for whatever good you're looking at. So probably a more interesting thing, and all these market expectations, how they're really going to operate is basically because of some, whether it's a crazier winter or whether or not it's there's going to be some shutdown in the production of certain goods overseas that you're kind of using as a supplier. All of it's going to operate through the price of the goods. So what I'll kind of ask you questions on and kind of expect you to know going into the exam is just price expectations. Okay. So let's think about here, and I'll got it up on the board, but we'll kind of think about if I saw or I expected prices to be higher in the future. Right? What might I do today? Right. So let's say I'm selling gas, and for whatever reason, supposedly the price, everyone's going to increase their price by $1 tomorrow. And I'm the gas station. Well, it's kind of hard for me to get, if I sell gas today and I deplete some of my resources, it's hard to get all the way back up to full the next day. I don't have a delivery company. So if I think the prices are going to jump by $1 overnight, what might I do today if I was at gas station? So I know if I sell gas today, I'm only going to get $4 for every gallon I sell. If I hold off until tomorrow, I can get $5 for every gallon. I'm going to wait. So by waiting, what did I do to my current supply? I actually decreased. I held on to it. So if we expect prices to be higher in the future, when we think about current supply, we're actually going to see, kind of call that S. I just kind of put like a mark next to represent. That's new supply, old supply. If it helps you, you kind of think about actually in these price expectations, what might be easier, think about this as current supply, right? If I expect prices to be higher tomorrow, my current supply, my supply today, I'll decrease, right? Because I want to hold off and sell it when the price is high. And then the exact opposite. If I expect the prices to drop by $1 tomorrow, and I'm that gas station, what do I really want to try to make sure I do today? Get all of my gas, all my gallons of gas out there and sell them today because I want to get that higher price, right? So it works in the exact opposite direction. I expect prices to be lower in the future. I'm going to supply a lot more today. So basically working the exact opposite as price expectation for consumers. Well, why is it working the exact opposite way? Because for producers, higher prices are good. That is their benefit. For consumers, higher prices are our cost, right? So that's a bad thing. So it's kind of working in the exact opposite directions there. Any questions on that? We can keep moving. And like I said, usually these market expectations, like I said, very specific to the good you're thinking of. But the idea of there being a colder than average winter, you think people are going to be willing to pay higher prices. And so what you're really expecting is colder winter will result in higher prices. I'm going to hold on to my natural gas till then. Yeah.
Make more sense if they, like, okay, Cause normally, like, as a consumer who wants to go buy gas,
Mhm.
you go to the gas station that's cheaper. So
Mhm.
if they held off and like kept it at $4 when it was a 5, then they would sell out of their gas faster than what those, because more people would go to that gas.
Yeah, so you're saying, but you're still saying, I'm gonna hold on to it until tomorrow, because I know tomorrow I'll have a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Right? So current supply, today's supply, if you still wanna hold on to it, but you wanna make sure you have the lowest price, you're talking about the lowest price tomorrow. You're still holding on to your gas and reducing today's supply so that you make sure you have it in the future. So you're not thinking, so higher expected prices are gonna decrease current supply. But you're right, like if you're thinking about future supply, right? The reason why you don't see shifts in demand there is because if I'm in the same time period, if I'm talking about supply and the price of a good today, there's no shifts in the supply curve, right? I would just be moving to different points along the supply curve. So if I'm thinking about how does future prices alter future supply, it doesn't. Future prices and future supply, we would just have a future supply curve that told us the relationship between future price and future quantity supply. But if we're thinking about future prices and quantity supplied, you can almost think about this as current quantity supplied. Well, then that's where we see the shifts. Does that help a little bit? Yeah, so it's really that we're thinking about current supply and future prices. You have two different time periods. Any other questions? And I get what you're saying. You could also think about, like, I'm simplifying this a little bit, using the examples just to think about how future prices. The optimal pricing strategy might be to reduce my current supply, hold off on selling, then tomorrow, when I see everybody else have it at $5, well, I increase my current supply, or my, supply the day before. I'll have all my gas filled, and then I'll just set a slightly lower price so that everybody wants to come to my gas station. Then I not only am selling at a higher price, but I'm getting away more consumers as well. So that's like an added, you're kind of asking like, take this principle and combine something else, which is I want to make sure I have the lowest price. We'll kind of get more, I don't even think I think it's right at the first exam. We'll start talking more about industrial organization, like companies and how you compete, setting different prices and things like that. So jumping the gun a little bit, but thinking about things in the right way. So this is kind of like a summary slide. I created one for the demand curve. When we talk about shift in demand, I tried to summarize some of these things. Now, one thing I didn't talk about, I'm gonna make sure before I get to the clickers, because I think it's, well, let's go through some quick questions and then kind of work through some example problems. And then I want to mention one more thing, which I have up here. So if I forget to, somebody raise their hand, remind me. I want to talk a little bit about tax. Okay? So let's think about kind of get an idea of where we're at here. And I'll probably try to be pretty easy on these. Okay, that's fine. All right. So let's say I'm thinking about, I've got the quantity and the price of beer. Right? The market I'm looking at is quantity sold of beer, however many it's done. You measure this in pounds or ounces, whatever it is. So if the price of hops, okay, what happens if the price of hops increases? Right? So hops is a major input to produce beer. So if I see an increase in the price of hops, I've seen an increase in the input prices for this good. If I see an increase in the input prices for that good, which of these would I expect to represent what's happening to supply? So I'll give you guys a little bit of time to kind of get a response in here. If I see an increase in the price of an input, in this case hops for beer production, what happens to supply curve for beer? Kind of talk to people around you, see if they know something that you don't.
What did it change? The supply would change.
All right. If lower input prices, right, it's now relatively cheaper to make something. I'm gonna be willing to supply, or I'm able to supply more, right? It costs me less money. So we said when input prices go down, what happened to the supply curve? We got this rightward shift, or the increase in supply, right? It now costs me less to produce, I can produce more, I can supply more. If input prices go up, right? So now input prices are going up, it now costs me more to make something. Am I gonna be willing to supply more or less of it? Less, so I should see a decrease in supply, which we talked about over here. So it's still open, so hopefully everybody gets this question correct. So if you haven't gotten an answer in, get an answer in now. I think there is 39 of us from what I counted earlier, so we should be good. So right, hopefully everybody got that one. We're talking through it, kind of see this decrease in supply. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. So let's try one more. I'm gonna be nice on this. Okay. So now let's think about what if we're looking at the supply curve for pizza. And I chose Papa John's here, maybe. Probably not supposed to say they were having Ball State, but they were. So that's why I have an example. So if we all of a sudden see more, or actually, I think I had it spelled wrong. Then they like rebrand. Isn't it like just called Papa or something?
They got rid of
The apostrophe.
the dude that was.
Well, they did. I know they rebranded. I think they took away the apostrophe. It's not his anymore. Like, real slight there. Anyways, I digress. So we have more producers, right? We're adding more suppliers, more Papa John's locations. If the price stayed the same, what would we expect to see happen to the supply curve for pizza, right? So there are now more sellers, more producers of it. I guess I got to open it up first. What would you expect to see happen to supply, right? The higher number of suppliers or producers, what's going to happen? So I'll give you guys a little bit of time to talk about this, and we'll kind of come together. Yeah. No, I thought that's what it was. It's like a real petty thing, like, yeah, it's not yours anymore. Right? All right. You haven't gotten an answer in. Take your best guess here. If we see an increase in the number of Papa John's and the number of suppliers of pizza, what's going to happen to the supply curve for pizza? So maybe I was picking up some other people there. So we got 38. Thought we had 39 before. Maybe I counted wrong. We were picking up someone from another class, but everybody got your answer in. I'm going to close it out. All right. So which one of these should I expect to see? A, right? If I have more suppliers, then when I'm coming up with my market supply curve, I'm adding up more supply, more individual supply curves. It's going to make my market supply much higher. At the same price, I'm going to see much higher quantity supply when I have more people producing or more people supplying it. Now, sometimes I'll put like clickers or like a question on the slide just so it's good to be able to go back. I'm not going to kind of ask you guys another question. This is kind of reiterate this price or this principle. What happens in supply curve for pizza if I saw the price of pizza rise? Well, there I'm thinking about the price and the supply of the same good, changes in the price of that good, and then the different quantity supplied. That is the definition of the supply curve. It's telling me the relationship between the price of that good and the quantity supply of that good. So there's no shift in supply when the price of the good change of the good we're looking at changes. We're just moving at different points along that supply curve, right? Remember, the idea of the supply curve is the relationship between the price of that good, wanting supply to that good, holding everything else constant. These things we've been talking about, that different supply curve, those are the things we were holding constant. When I just see a change in the price of that good, everything else has stayed the same. My shift, there's no shift in my supply curve, I'm just moving to different points along. Okay. Any questions in there? Is that clicking? No pun intended. So, where are we at in time today? Okay. I did all right. So let's think about, we talked about supply and demand. What's more interesting, like, and I think some of the confusion we were talking about supply, right, even Friday and today, where you're like, well, yeah, but what if there's nobody that's like, doesn't matter what the price is, if nobody wants to buy it, well, how can you see that much supply? That doesn't make any sense. So the combination of supply and demand is what allows us to understand what's going to happen in the market. What's the number of transactions for this good, purchase and selling it, are we going to see? Because I can only sell a good if somebody buys it from me, if there's someone willing to buy it. So the idea would be kind of equilibrium. All right, so I'm using this idea of any good. We can think about how much of it is going to be purchased and sold on the market. So I think we've got different questions, right? How many units? What was the price of it going to be? Basically, you can summarize this all down to one line. Visually, and we'll talk through why in just a second, but as you're working through homework problems or, you know, we get to the exam, even if you're like completely lost as to why, let me think about here, right? And if it helps you to write this out, if you're taking notes, right, you can write out supply. I'll usually just write it as an S kind of from now on, and then demand, I just kind of write with that capital D. Visually, where the market equilibrium is going to be, what the price of a good ends up being, and how much of it is purchased and sold in the market, is just going to be where that supply curve and that demand curve intersect. Okay. So visually, the equilibrium point, and I'm kind of calling that P star and Q star, the equilibrium price and quantity of whatever good we're looking at, is going to be where the price, where the supply and the demand curve intersect. Now, why is that the case? Well, if we can think about what the definition of these two curves was, the demand curve was the relationship between price and the quantity demanded. So at this price, the quantity demanded would be whatever this amount is, right? Plug in the price into that demand curve, do some algebra, solve for that quantity. We said the supply curve is the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. So at that price, we're at the same point on the demand curve. What we would say is, another way of thinking about the equilibrium is it's the price at which quantity supplied is exactly equal to quantity demanded. Now, visually, it's just where those two lines hit, but because of what those two lines represent, another way of thinking about the equilibrium quantity is the price at which price at which quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. Might be jumping the gun a little bit here, and I think we'll talk about this more on Friday, but let's think about why it ends up being the equilibrium. What if instead, and I'll call this kind of, no, it's going to be way too much. We'll just call this PH, so like a hypothetical price, right? Let's say the price was actually a little bit higher than what the equilibrium price, or at least what we think the equilibrium price should be. At that price, what is quantity demanded? Well, how would we find the quantity demanded? We'll look at this price, go over to my demand curve, and my demand curve tells me at that price, quantity demanded is going to be down there. Questions on that? So remember, because that demand curve told us that relationship between price and quantity demanded, whatever price we're interested in, we can go over to the demand curve and figure out what would the quantity demand be at that price.
Is that affect the equilibrium?
So this is, I'll get there. I think I'll answer the question by the time I'm done. what would the quantity supplied be at that hypothetically higher price than what we think the equilibrium price should be? Well, I go over to my supply curve. My quantity supplied is much higher. Right? Well, now we run into this problem. At this price, people are willing to supply way more to the market, but there's nobody to buy them, right? The amount demanded is way less. And if you want to put some numbers to this, you can think about maybe 30 units would be supplied at this higher price, but there's only 20 people that want to buy this good, right? And so we would have what? We would call this a surplus. We've got more supplied than people want to buy. Now we'll talk more about surpluses Friday, but that's kind of foreshadowing here. So what's going to happen? These suppliers say, well, man, we're not selling any of these units. So if we're producing these, like, we're eating the whole cost. There's no benefit and there's no one to buy them. So what are they going to do? They're going to say, well, if we decrease the price a little bit, well, now I can, I'm still willing to supply more than is people are willing to buy, but at least I've sold a few more units, right? And basically they continue to do this down to the point where the number of units they're producing is exactly equal to the number of units purchased. And once they get to that point, well, why would they produce less than that? Like, they're selling all their units, they're going to be okay. Now, kind of the exact opposite would work if we had prices that were set below the equilibrium. Well, there, so let's say we had the exact opposite going on. We've got supply, demand, quantity, price. And I won't even put the equilibrium up here first. So let's say the current price was set right here. I go over to my supply curve. At this lower price, producers are willing to supply a lower amount than the equilibrium. And if I go over to my demand curve, at lower prices, people are willing to buy a lot more. Right? Well, now the problem is, yeah, there's all this demand. People are willing to pay. In fact, every single person up here on the demand curve, remember, the demand curve is reflecting the marginal benefit. So all these consumers who are purchasing this good, their marginal benefit is higher than the price. They'd actually be willing to pay a much higher price to get that good. So what do you think the suppliers do? Well, we're not, at these lower prices, right? There's all these people willing to pay a higher price. So slowly you see the kind of price start to increase. Right? Well, after this price increase, yeah, the quantity supplied, right? The price going up is a good thing for these producers. They start producing more. But as the price goes up, there's fewer people, right? Everybody in this range, their marginal benefit, which is what that demand curve reflects, right? Their marginal benefit is now below this new higher price. So if the marginal cost, the price to consumers is now greater than the marginal benefit, they stop buying the good, which is why we see quantity demanded decrease. Right? As that price goes up, these people no longer benefit more than the cost of buying that good. And then that kind of continues until we get to that point where we see quantity demanded and quantity supplied be exactly equal to each other. Now, if I raise the price, I'm just losing more, I'm losing more people, not gaining any additional money for people to stop buying the good. Right? Now, when it comes to like maximizing revenue, it's a little bit down the road. We'll talk about some optimal strategies for companies to maximize revenue. But in terms of what we see on the market as a whole, not by company, but the entire market, this kind of process, how long it takes kind of varies, right? How long does it take to get to equilibrium? It kind of just depends, right? Which isn't a fun answer, but often that is going to be the answer to economics, because we're principles of micro, right? We're kind of looking at some simplistic models. How long it takes to equilibrium is going to depend on a lot of other factors, things that you might learn like an intermediate micro.
You say you wanted to talk about taxes.
I did. Thank you for reminding me. But before we do that, any questions on this? All right, so I did want to talk about taxes. So we got a little bit of a precursor. Let me see where I kind of gave you a visual. We'll kind of pick up on this next class. Because I do want to talk about taxes because I don't want to go. So we're talking about the supply curve, and I might even kind of give you a little bit of foreshadowing to something we're talking about next class as well with equilibrium. So I'll tie these two things in. So let's say I'm looking at a good, and actually I'll choose one kind of proof point. So call this, yeah, we can do this right now. So here's my equilibrium, right? Right now, kind of think about it where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demand, whatever price that is, or visually where supply and demand could intersect on a graph. Those are kind of just two different ways of thinking. So let's say this is the market, because this is, I thought about this I was talking to someone about this. So I'm from Michigan, originally it's where I grew up, and they legalized marijuana, and they're like dispensaries everywhere, right? When they legalized it, they did it through like a referendum, and everybody agreed to this crazy high tax percentage, right? So I forget what I think it's like 14 or 15% sales tax on it, right? So if that tax didn't exist, here's going to be the price for whatever kind of product you're buying, right? Whatever unit you want to think about there, but it's going to have an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. Okay. So what happens now instead when you agree to a 14 or 50% sales tax? Well, now at every single quantity, doesn't matter how much I want to buy, what's going to be true about the marginal cost? Yeah, now when I'm the producer, I'm producing, I'm selling it. For everything I sell, I have to pay this huge sales tax. We call these ad valorem sales tax, the production tax, right? So the cost at every single quantity, I'll even do colors here so we can kind of see the difference. The cost, no matter what quantity I'm looking at, is now going to be higher, right? Or what are essentially our taxes? They are input prices. In order to produce this, I now have to pay this additional tax. My input prices or my input costs went up, so I'm going to see what happened to my supply curve, kind of this leftward shift, all right? You gotta think about, instead of actually, let me do this better. This is my supply curve plus the tax. Because before, if the supply curve represented my marginal costs, my new marginal cost will be whatever my old marginal costs were, plus the additional tax that I have to pay on every single unit I produce. All right. So taxes essentially decrease my supply curve. So what does that do? Well, where's the new equilibrium? If the taxes on, let's for a second just not think about taxes on consumers. It would work in a similar way. But here we're thinking about the taxes on the producers, whoever's selling this. Right? Generally, they then pass it on to the consumer. But for now, we'll just think about they're the one who have to pay that upfront tax to them. Well, demand hasn't changed, but after that tax, where's my new equilibrium? Well, my new supply curve that has not only the marginal cost, but now the new cost of this tax is up here. It's my demand curve up here. So my new equilibrium, we kind of call this P star star, right? The second, kind of after this tax, where's my new equilibrium? Where is my new equilibrium quantity? I now see by adding this tax to this good, I've decreased the amount of purchases, at least this is looking at the legal purchase market, and I've increased the price that people are going to have to end up paying. Right? So, you know, when people pass these memorandums, anytime you look at something, you're agreeing to a tax, what you're really agreeing to is what? Higher prices, right? Which, you know, we'll talk more about taxes later on in the semester, but you, the consumer, lose out, right? Who ends up gaining? Government gets all that additional tax. Right? So taxes are another thing that can shift our supply curve or decrease our supply curve. Next class, we'll talk more about when we see these shifts in demand and supply, what's happening to our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity. Okay? All right, so hopefully, once you get on, make sure you re-register, your IP is registered. Hopefully, when I resync it this afternoon, I'm able to pick everybody up. We'll be good to go Friday. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on Friday.